Hey guys! Tonight, we slip into the silk-draped chambers of Alexandria, where shadows dance on marble walls and every whisper could topple a dynasty. You're about to witness a Game of Thrones that makes medieval politics look like children playing dress-up. This is the story of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, and how she turned seduction into statecraft and transformed her bedroom into a battlefield where empires lived and died. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture Alexandria in 51 BCE. The greatest library in the ancient world stands gleaming white against the Mediterranean sky. Ships from every corner of the known world crowd the harbor, their holds bursting with spices, silk, and secrets. But beneath the marble facades and golden statues, something rotten festers in the heart of Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander the Great's general, has ruled for 3 centuries. And like all old dynasties, it has grown sick with power, twisted by tradition, and drunk on its own divine mythology. You walk through the royal quarter where incense burns day and night, where servants pad silently across floors of polished stone, where every corridor whispers with conspiracy. The air is thick with more than perfume. It carries the weight of a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse, torn between siblings who would rather see Egypt burn than share its crown. Cleopatra, the 7th Philippa, 18 years old and sharp as a Damascus blade, paces the halls of her ancestral palace. But she is not alone in her claim to the throne. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, barely 10 years old, stands beside her as co-ruler, backed by a council of advisors who see opportunity in his youth. The Ptolemies had always married their siblings to keep the bloodline pure, but purity had bred madness, and madness had bred ambition that knew no bounds. Archaeological evidence tells us the Ptolemaic court was a nest of vipers wrapped in silk. Brothers murdered sisters, mothers poisoned sons, and children learned to smile while sharpening knives behind their backs. The palace walls had witnessed 3 centuries of fraternal war, and now they would witness one more. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. Rome was watching, and Rome was hungry. You see Cleopatra in her private chambers, surrounded by scrolls and maps, her mind already calculating moves 3 steps ahead of her enemies. She speaks 9 languages fluently, has read every military treatise in the Great Library, and understands something her predecessors had forgotten. Egypt's power no longer came from divine bloodlines or ancient traditions. It came from grain ships that fed Rome's masses, from trade routes that enriched Roman merchants, and from the simple fact that whoever controlled the Nile controlled the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. The young queen knows she cannot rule through blood alone. She must become indispensable to powers greater than herself, must transform Egypt from a prize to be won into a player that could not be ignored. But first, she must survive her own family. Ptolemy the XIII's advisors whisper poison into his young ears. They tell him that Egypt needs a pharaoh, not a queen, that the gods favor men over women, that Cleopatra's intelligence is a threat to the natural order. Chief among these voices is Pothinus, the royal eunuch, whose ambition burns as hot as any intact man's. Beside him stands Achilles, commander of the royal guard, a soldier who has forgotten that loyalty to Egypt matters more than loyalty to gold. The tension crackles through the palace like lightning before a storm. Servants scurry with downcast eyes, knowing that to witness too much might mean a blade across the throat. Even the priests of the great temples choose their words carefully, understanding that the gods themselves seem divided on who should wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. One curious detail emerges from the ancient sources. Cleopatra had begun appearing at public ceremonies dressed as the goddess Isis, mother of Egypt, protector of the kingdom. It was brilliant theater, connecting her not just to the royal bloodline, but to the divine feminine that had protected Egypt since the beginning of time. Her brother's advisors could claim divine favor all they wanted, but they could not match the visual power of a queen who literally embodied the goddess. Historical records show us that the first crisis came swiftly. A poor harvest along the Nile meant less grain for export, less tribute for Rome, and less gold to pay the royal guard. Hungry people make restless subjects, and restless subjects make nervous rulers. Ptolemy the XIII's faction saw opportunity in the crisis. They whispered that the gods were punishing Egypt for accepting a female pharaoh, that only a male ruler could restore the kingdom's fortunes. You can almost hear the midnight meetings in the palace's hidden chambers. Voices hushed but urgent, plotting the removal of a queen who refused to be the decorative figurehead they had expected. Maps are spread across marble tables showing the deployment of loyal troops, the location of treasure vaults, the quickest routes to the harbor should plans go awry. The smell of lamp oil mingles with sweat and fear as conspirators debate the timing of their coup. But Cleopatra is not the naive girl they imagine. She has her own network of spies, her own loyal followers, her own plans within plans. The palace eunuchs who serve her meals also carry her messages. The scribes who record her official proclamations also keep detailed records of her enemies' movements. Even some of the priests, despite their public neutrality, send coded warnings when they hear whispers in the temple corridors. The queen's most trusted advisor is Apollodorus, a young Sicilian whose loyalty burns as bright as his intelligence. Unlike the court eunuchs who serve multiple masters, Apollodorus has bound his fate to hers completely. He moves through Alexandria's streets like a shadow, listening, watching, preparing for the war that everyone knows is coming, but no one dares name aloud. Ancient historians tell us that Cleopatra spent her final months in Alexandria, strengthening alliances with the city's merchant class, the artisans whose workshops filled the royal treasury, the dock workers who loaded the grain ships, the common people who remembered that the Ptolemies had once been protectors rather than parasites. She understood what her brother's faction did not. That power in Egypt no longer flowed solely from the palace, but from the streets, the markets, the harbors, where real wealth was created. The breaking point comes with brutal efficiency. Ptolemy XIII's advisors convince him that co-rule is impossible, that Egypt cannot have two pharaohs when Rome demands clear leadership. They present him with documents supposedly proving that Cleopatra has been negotiating secretly with Rome behind his back, planning to rule as a Roman puppet rather than an Egyptian queen. The accusations are lies wrapped in enough truth to seem plausible. You witness the moment when the young king signs his sister's death warrant, his hand trembling slightly as the stylus scratches across papyrus. He is still a child in many ways, but he has been taught that mercy is weakness, that family bonds matter less than royal prerogatives. The advisors who guide his hand smile with satisfaction, knowing that they have just made themselves the true rulers of Egypt. The palace erupts into controlled chaos. Guards loyal to Ptolemy the 13th move swiftly through the corridors, seizing key positions, arresting Cleopatra's known supporters, securing the treasury and the armory. But when they reach the queen's chambers, they find only empty rooms and servants who claim to know nothing of her whereabouts. Cleopatra has vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the lingering scent of myrrh and the echo of her laughter. She had seen the coup coming days before it arrived. While her brother's advisors plotted in secret chambers, she had been preparing her own escape, gathering loyal followers, securing funds from hidden accounts, arranging safe houses throughout Alexandria and beyond. The girl who had spent her childhood reading military treatises had learned the most important lesson of all, that the best battles are won before they are fought. The flight from Alexandria reads like something from an adventure tale, but every detail has been preserved in the historical record. Cleopatra, disguised as a merchant's daughter, slips through the city streets as her brother's soldiers search house by house. Apollodorus guides her through back alleys and forgotten passages, using his knowledge of the city's hidden geography to stay ahead of their pursuers. They reach the harbor just before dawn, where a small fishing boat waits to carry them across the Mediterranean. As Alexandria's lighthouse fades behind them, Cleopatra does not weep or rage against her fate. Instead, she turns her face toward the rising sun and begins planning her return. The Game of Thrones has begun in earnest, and she intends to win it all. But this is only the opening move in a contest that will reshape the ancient world. Cleopatra's exile is not an ending, but a transformation, the moment when a clever princess becomes a master strategist. She understands now that her throne cannot be won through bloodline or tradition alone. It must be seized through intelligence, alliance, and a willingness to risk everything on a single, audacious gamble. The Mediterranean stretches before her, vast and full of possibilities. Somewhere across those waters lies Rome, the greatest power in the world, torn by its own civil wars and hungry for Egyptian gold. And Cleopatra, daughter of pharaohs, last of her bloodline, begins to smile as she contemplates the moves that will either restore her kingdom or destroy it completely. The fishing boat that carries Cleopatra across the Mediterranean is small and cramped, its hull reeking of salt and yesterday's catch. But as she huddles beneath coarse sailcloth, the exiled queen's mind races with possibilities that stretch far beyond the narrow confines of her temporary prison. She knows where she must go, and more importantly, she knows who she must become to survive what comes next. Syria beckons across the waves, a Roman province where exiled royalty might find sanctuary among the merchant princes and displaced nobles who gather like moths around the flame of imperial power. But Cleopatra is not seeking mere survival. She is hunting bigger prey, stalking opportunities that will either restore her throne or see her join the countless forgotten pretenders who litter history's margins. You follow her as she establishes herself in Damascus, moving through the city's labyrinthine markets with the fluid grace of someone born to command but wise enough to blend into shadows when necessary. Here, among the silk merchants and spice traders, she begins weaving the web that will either catch an empire or strangle her in its threads. Every conversation is calculated, every smile a weapon, every gesture designed to build the network she will need for what comes next. The Syrian merchants who host her exile see only a beautiful young woman with royal bloodline and tragic story. They compete to offer her sanctuary, imagining that harboring a deposed pharaoh might bring them favor when fortune's wheel turns again. But Cleopatra sees deeper currents flowing beneath their hospitality. She recognizes the hunger in their eyes, the way they calculate profit margins, even as they speak of honor and ancient friendship. These men control trade routes that stretch from the Black Sea to the Red Sea, from the cedar forests of Lebanon to the pearl beds of the Persian Gulf. More importantly, they possess something she desperately needs: information. Every caravan that arrives brings news from Rome, whispers of political upheavals, rumors of which generals are rising and which are falling from grace. In Damascus's markets, she assembles a picture of an empire eating itself alive with ambition. Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, the two titans who have dominated Roman politics for a generation, are finally moving toward the confrontation everyone knew was inevitable. Their rivalry has poisoned the Republic's institutions, turned the Senate into a theater of mutual destruction, and created opportunities for those clever enough to position themselves between the grinding stones of their conflict. Cleopatra studies these men like a physician examining symptoms of disease. Caesar, brilliant and ruthless, beloved by his legions and hated by the conservative establishment. Pompey, the great general grown fat on past glories, still formidable, but perhaps too comfortable with his own legend. Both need Egyptian grain to feed their armies, Egyptian gold to pay their soldiers, Egyptian ports to supply their fleets, and both assume that Egypt will simply fall into line behind whichever one emerges victorious. They have forgotten that Egypt is not merely a prize to be claimed, but a player with its own interests, its own ambitions, its own dangerous queen who refuses to be anyone's passive trophy. While they maneuver their legions across Italy and Greece, Cleopatra begins assembling her own forces, not armies of soldiers, but networks of influence that will prove far more deadly than any sword. Her agents spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean, appearing in Rhodes and Cyprus, in Antioch and Jerusalem, wherever Roman merchants gathered to discuss the coming war. They pose as traders and pilgrims, as scribes and entertainers, but their true mission is intelligence gathering on a scale that would impress even Caesar's legendary spies. Every conversation is memorized, every rumor cataloged, every weakness noted for future exploitation. Meanwhile, back in Alexandria, her brother Ptolemy XIII discovers that ruling Egypt is considerably more difficult than seizing its throne. The harvest remains poor, the people grow restless, and Rome's demands for tribute continue regardless of domestic troubles. His advisors, so confident in their coup, now find themselves managing crises they never anticipated. Pothinus attempts to negotiate with Roman creditors, while Achilles struggles to maintain order in a kingdom that seems to be slowly coming apart at the seams. The irony is delicious. The men who claimed Cleopatra was unfit to rule now face the same challenges that drove them to rebellion. But without her intelligence, her linguistic skills, or her deep understanding of Egypt's intricate political landscape, they had imagined that removing her would solve their problems, but instead it had merely revealed how much they had depended on abilities they never bothered to develop themselves. Reports reached Damascus of riots in Memphis, of priests questioning the legitimacy of a boy pharaoh controlled by eunuchs, of grain shipments to Rome arriving late and underweight. Each piece of news brings a smile to Cleopatra's lips, not from cruelty, but from satisfaction at seeing her calculations proven correct. Her brother's regime is rotting from within, creating the very instability she will need to exploit when the moment arrives. But timing is everything in the game she has chosen to play. Move too early, and she becomes just another failed pretender. Move too late, and the opportunity vanishes forever. She must wait for the perfect moment when Roman attention is focused elsewhere, when her deniable, when the stakes brother's weakness becomes un or high enough that even Caesar or Pompey might consider backing a brilliant queen over an incompetent boy king. That moment arrives sooner than anyone expects. News reaches Damascus that Caesar has crossed the Rubicon, that civil war has erupted across the Roman world, that Pompey is gathering forces in the east while Caesar consolidates power in Italy. The Republic is tearing itself apart, and in that chaos lies opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. Cleopatra immediately begins reaching out to both sides, sending carefully crafted messages that offer Egyptian support while committing to nothing definitive. To Caesar, she hints at her brother's incompetence and her own superior qualifications to rule Egypt as Rome's reliable ally. To Pompey, she emphasizes her family's ancient friendship with Rome and her desire to restore traditional values to a kingdom corrupted by youthful inexperience. It is a dangerous game, playing both sides against the middle, but she understands that neutrality is not an option for Egypt. Whichever Roman emerges victorious will demand absolute loyalty from Egypt's ruler, and that ruler had better be someone capable of delivering on their promises. Her brother's faction may have seized the throne, but they lack the competence to maintain the complex relationship Egypt needs with Rome. The intelligence flowing into Damascus paints a picture of escalating conflict that will reshape the Mediterranean world. Caesar's legions march with legendary efficiency while Pompey's forces gather strength in Greece and Asia Minor. Egypt finds itself caught between them, its grain vital to both sides, its strategic position too important to remain neutral. The kingdom that had tried to stay above Roman politics now discovers that such luxury no longer exists. Cleopatra realizes that her moment of opportunity is approaching faster than she had originally calculated. The Roman Civil War will not last forever, and whoever wins will immediately turn attention to consolidating control over Egypt. She must position herself to be on the winning side, but more importantly, she must make herself indispensable to that winner. Being merely useful is not enough when survival depends on becoming absolutely necessary. Her preparations take on new urgency. Messages fly between Damascus and her remaining supporters in Alexandria. Coded communications that look like innocent merchant correspondence, but carry instructions for a campaign more audacious than anything attempted in Ptolemaic history. She Islam her throne through military force, not simply planning to rig. She is preparing to see or dynastic right-duce an empire into making her its most valuable ally. The pieces are moving into position for the most dangerous gamble of her life. Soon, very soon, Cleopatra will emerge from the shadows of exile to play her hand in the greatest game of thrones the ancient world has ever seen. And when she does, the very foundations of power will tremble beneath the footsteps of a queen who has learned that survival requires not just courage, but the willingness to risk everything on a single perfect move. The summer of 48 BCE brings news that changes everything. Caesar has crushed Pompey's forces at the Battle of Pharsalus, sending the great general fleeing toward Egypt with the remnants of his shattered army. For Ptolemy XIII and his advisors, this presents what they believe is a golden opportunity to curry favor with the victor by eliminating Caesar's greatest rival. For Cleopatra, watching from Damascus as events unfold, it represents the opening she has been waiting for. You can almost see her in that moment, scrolling through the dispatch that brings word of Pompey's flight, her dark eyes calculating possibilities that stretch far beyond the immediate crisis, while her brother's court celebrates what they imagine will be their salvation. Cleopatra recognizes the trap they are walking into with such naive confidence. They think they understand Roman politics, but they are children playing with forces that could incinerate them all. Pompey Magnus arrives in Alexandria's harbor like a ghost of his former glory. The man who once commanded the Mediterranean now travels with a handful of loyal followers and a desperation that clings to him like morning mist. He comes seeking sanctuary, perhaps even military support, from the kingdom his own policies had helped to impoverish. It is a bitter irony that the architect of Egypt's subjugation now depends on Egyptian mercy for his survival. Ptolemy XIII's advisors convene in emergency session, their voices echoing through marble halls as they debate how to respond to this unexpected gift from the gods. Pothinus argues passionately that killing Pompey will demonstrate Egypt's loyalty to Caesar while eliminating a dangerous rival who might otherwise destabilize their carefully maintained neutrality. Achilles agrees, seeing military advantage in presenting Caesar with his enemy's head when the victor inevitably arrives to claim his prize. The decision they reach will echo through history as one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in the annals of statecraft. Rather than offering Pompey genuine sanctuary or honest refusal, they choose treachery wrapped in false friendship. A small boat is sent to escort the great general ashore, its crew including men whose names will become synonymous with betrayal. As Pompey steps onto Egyptian sand for the final time, steel slides between his ribs, and the Mediterranean world loses one of its titans to the short-sighted ambitions of provincial schemers. The murder sends shockwaves rippling across the ancient world, but nowhere more powerfully than through the mind of Julius Caesar when he arrives in Alexandria 3 days later. The conqueror of Gaul expects to find his rival in chains or exile, a living symbol of his complete victory. Instead, he is presented with a severed head and a smile from advisors who clearly expect gratitude for services they imagine have been rendered on his behalf. Historical sources preserve Caesar's reaction with vivid clarity. The man who had crossed the Rubicon, who had burned his bridges behind him in pursuit of absolute power, weeps openly at the sight of his rival's remains, not from grief, but from rage at being deprived of the magnanimous gesture that would have crowned his victory with mercy. These Egyptian fools had stolen his moment of triumph, reducing the climax of civil war to common murder committed by provincial assassins. You can picture the scene in Alexandria's throne room as Caesar's fury crashes over Ptolemy the 13th's court like a tide of molten bronze. The boy king, barely 13 now, shrinks before the legendary general's wrath, while his advisors realize with growing horror that their masterstroke has become their doom. They had imagined themselves playing Roman politics, but they were children with wooden swords challenging a gladiator in the arena. Caesar's anger burns with the heat of personal insult, compounded by political necessity. He cannot appear to approve of Pompey's assassination without seeming to endorse the murder of defeated rivals, a precedent that might someday be applied to his own potential downfall. More immediately, he needs Egypt stable and productive, not torn apart by the kind of chaos that incompetent regicides inevitably create. These advisors have proven themselves unfit to manage a province, much less a kingdom. The Roman general's solution is characteristically bold and utterly ruthless. He declares himself arbiter of the Egyptian succession dispute, announcing that he will personally resolve the conflict between Ptolemy the 13th and his exiled sister. It is a masterful political maneuver that allows him to appear as peacemaker while positioning himself as kingmaker, the man whose word will determine who sits on the pharaoh's throne. News of Caesar's decision races across the Mediterranean faster than any ship, carried by merchants and diplomats who understand that the balance of power has shifted once again. In Damascus, Cleopatra receives the intelligence with the satisfaction of someone whose most daring calculations have proven correct. The moment she has been preparing for has finally arrived, but she knows that everything depends on how perfectly she executes the next phase of her plan. The queen, who had fled Alexandria as a frightened girl, now prepares to return as a woman who has learned to think like an empire. Her network of agents activates with clockwork precision, spreading golden promises throughout Syria and Egypt, preparing the ground for what will either be the most brilliant coup in Ptolemaic history or the spectacular finale of a dynasty that has already outlived its time. But Cleopatra understands something that Caesar himself may not yet fully appreciate. The Roman general needs her success as much as she needs his support. Egypt's grain feeds Rome's masses. Egypt's gold fills Rome's treasury. And Egypt's strategic position guards Rome's eastern flank. A stable, competent ruler in Alexandria is not merely convenient for Caesar. It is absolutely essential for his own survival in a world where hungry citizens and unpaid soldiers have a tendency to remedy their grievances with daggers in the dark. She begins her journey back to Egypt not as a supplicant seeking Caesar's favor, but as a partner offering solutions to problems that threaten them both. The girl who had once paced palace corridors in frustrated rage has become a woman who understands that true power lies not in commanding others, but in making herself indispensable to those who believe they command her. The ship that carries her toward Alexandria cuts through waters that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of legends. But as the Egyptian coastline rises from the Mediterranean haze, Cleopatra knows that she is not returning to reclaim an old throne. She is sailing toward the creation of something entirely new, a partnership between queen and conqueror that will reshape the ancient world in ways neither of them can yet imagine. The lighthouse of Alexandria looms ahead, its beacon cutting through gathering dusk like a sword of fire. Soon, very soon, the last pharaoh of Egypt will step onto her native soil for a meeting that will determine not just her fate, but the destiny of civilizations yet unborn. The greatest gamble in the Game of Thrones is about to begin. The approach to Alexandria requires more than courage. It demands theatrical genius of the highest order, the kind of calculated spectacle that transforms political necessity into legend. Cleopatra understands that her first meeting with Caesar will determine everything that follows, and she has no intention of arriving like a common petitioner seeking audience with her conqueror. She will enter Alexandria as a queen reclaiming her birthright, but she will do so in a manner that no one, especially Caesar, will ever forget. The plan that takes shape in her mind is audacious beyond belief, so perfectly calculated that it borders on madness. While Ptolemy the 13th's guards patrol the harbor and his spies watch every ship that enters Alexandria's waters, Cleopatra prepares to slip past them all hidden in plain sight. She will not skulk through back alleys or rely on loyal fishermen to smuggle her ashore. Instead, she will transform herself into cargo, the most precious and dangerous cargo ever delivered to a Roman general. You witness the preparation as Apollodorus secures a small merchant vessel and fills its hold with the kind of goods that flow daily into Alexandria's markets. Carpets from Persia, silks from distant China, spices that perfume the air with promises of wealth and luxury. But among these treasures, wrapped in the finest linen and bound with golden cords, lies a package that will reshape the course of empire. Cleopatra herself, cocooned like some exotic butterfly waiting to emerge and dazzle the world with wings of silk and steel. The sensation of being bound within those linens must have been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Every breath carefully controlled, every muscle held rigid to maintain the illusion of inanimate cargo. She lies in darkness, feeling the ship's motion beneath her, hearing the casual conversation of sailors who have no idea they are transporting the most dangerous woman in the Mediterranean. The irony is delicious. The queen, who had been forced to flee like a common criminal, now returns as contraband, smuggled into her own palace like forbidden treasure. Archaeological evidence suggests that such carpets were indeed common gifts between rulers and Roman officials, expensive enough to justify personal delivery by trusted merchants, large enough to conceal even a tall woman if properly prepared. The plan was not merely theatrical but practical, exploiting the very trade networks that had made Alexandria wealthy while turning luxury itself into camouflage. Only someone who understood both Roman customs and Egyptian commerce could have conceived such a scheme. As the merchant ship approaches Alexandria's harbor, you can almost feel the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning before a storm. Ptolemy XIII's guards inspect every vessel, searching for signs of his sister's return, but they look for armies and weapons, not for queens disguised as merchandise. Their expectations blind them to possibilities their rigid minds cannot comprehend. They see what they expect to see, and what they expect does not include their greatest enemy delivered like a birthday present. The harbor bustles with its usual chaos of commerce and politics. Roman vessels ride at anchor beside Egyptian grain ships, their bronze rams glinting in the afternoon sun like the teeth of sleeping sea monsters. Merchants haggle in a dozen languages while slaves load and unload cargo that represents the wealth of continents. Caesar's own galley dominates the harbor, its scarlet banners proclaiming the presence of the man who now holds Egypt's fate in his hands. Apollodorus guides their small vessel through the maze of larger ships with the casual confidence of someone who belongs exactly where he is. To watching eyes, he appears to be nothing more than another Syrian merchant delivering exotic goods to Roman officials who have developed expensive tastes during their Egyptian sojourn. His papers are in perfect order. His manifest lists items that would interest any cultured general, and his manner suggests nothing more dangerous than commercial ambition. The moment of transfer from ship to shore requires nerves of steel from everyone involved. Cleopatra must remain motionless as dock workers hoist her makeshift cocoon, trusting that the bindings will hold, that her disguise will not slip, that no curious official will demand to inspect the expensive carpet being delivered to Caesar's quarters. Every second stretches like an eternity as she sways through the air, suspended between discovery and triumph, between death and destiny. You follow the procession as it winds through Alexandria's streets, past temples where her ancestors once worshipped, past markets where her subjects conduct the business that keeps Egypt prosperous, past the very palace where she was born and from which she was driven in disgrace. The city that should recognize its rightful queen instead watches indifferently as she passes, wrapped in silk and linen, invisible in the most visible possible way. The palace guards who admit Apollodorus and his precious cargo have no idea they are witnessing history in the making. To them, he is simply another merchant seeking to curry favor with Rome's most powerful general through expensive gifts. They wave him through gates that have been barred against Cleopatra for months, escort him down corridors where she once walked as princess and pharaoh, guide him toward chambers where Caesar awaits news of his latest conquest. Caesar himself sits in rooms that still bear traces of Ptolemaic grandeur, surrounded by maps and dispatches that reveal the scope of his ambitions. He has claimed Egypt as surely as he once claimed Gaul. But unlike Gaul, Egypt requires finesse rather than force. The kingdom's wealth depends on willing cooperation from its people, and its people have grown restless under Ptolemy the 13th's incompetent rule. The boy king's advisors promise stability they cannot deliver, threaten consequences they lack the power to enforce. The Roman general's attention is focused on correspondence from Rome when Apollodorus is announced, another in the endless parade of merchants and diplomats seeking audience with power. Caesar barely glances up as the Syrian enters, his arms straining under the weight of what appears to be an exceptionally fine carpet. Such gifts have become routine since his arrival in Alexandria, tributes from locals eager to demonstrate their loyalty to Rome's new master. But what happens next transforms routine into legend, mundane politics into mythic romance. As Apollodorus carefully unrolls the carpet, as the silk falls away to reveal not merchandise but monarchy, as Cleopatra emerges like Venus rising from the sea, Caesar witnesses something that will haunt his dreams and reshape his destiny. Here is not the frightened girl he expected to judge, but a woman who has transformed exile into education, defeat into opportunity, desperation into the kind of calculated audacity that empires are built upon. The silence that follows her emergence stretches like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. Two of the most brilliant minds in the ancient world study each other across a space measured in feet, but representing the distance between civilizations. Caesar sees intelligence in her eyes that matches his own, ambition that rivals his deepest hungers, and beauty that serves not as ornament, but as weapon. Cleopatra sees a man whose legend has preceded him, whose victories have shaken the world, whose support could restore her throne, or whose enmity could destroy her utterly. Historical sources preserve different versions of their first words, but all agree on the electric tension that filled the room as queen and conqueror took each other's measure. This was not a meeting between supplicant and patron, but a negotiation between equals who recognized in each other the ruthless intelligence necessary to reshape the world according to their will. The Game of Thrones had found its ultimate players. The conversation that follows will echo through history, not because of what is said, but because of what is understood without words. Cleopatra does not beg for restoration to her throne. Instead, she presents Caesar with solutions to problems he may not have fully recognized, offers him partnership in ventures that could secure both their futures, demonstrates that she possesses something no amount of Roman gold can purchase: the loyalty and respect of Egypt's people. She speaks to him in perfect Latin, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to rule, but tempered by the wisdom of someone who has learned that rule must be earned. Every gesture is calculated, every inflection designed to remind Caesar that he is not speaking to a defeated exile, but to the rightful pharaoh of the world's oldest kingdom. She has come not to surrender, but to negotiate, not to submit, but to offer alliance between powers that need each other more than either cares to admit. Caesar finds himself intrigued despite his legendary self-control. Here is a woman who understands politics does, who sees possibilities as deeply as he, where others see only problems, who offers him something he has rarely encountered: genuine intellectual equality, wrapped in beauty, that would have launched not just ships, but entire armadas. The girl who smuggled herself into his presence in a carpet is rapidly revealing herself to be someone who could help him conquer not just Egypt, but the entire Eastern Mediterranean. The afternoon lengthens into evening as they talk, their conversation ranging from Egyptian agriculture to Roman military tactics, from Greek philosophy to the practical challenges of governing diverse populations. Each discovers in the other a mind capable of grasping complex strategies, of seeing patterns that escape lesser mortals, of imagining futures that most people would dismiss as impossible fantasies. They are recognizing each other as kindred spirits in the most dangerous game ever played, and so the carpet unrolls to reveal not just a queen, but the birth of a legend that would outlast empires. In that marble chamber where East meets West, where Pharaoh faces Caesar, Cleopatra completes her transformation from exiled princess to master of the ancient world's most dangerous game. She had learned what her brother's advisors never understood: that true power lies not in commanding armies or hoarding gold, but in making yourself indispensable to those who believe they command you. The Game of Thrones she played was deadlier than any medieval intrigue, more sophisticated than any modern politics. With nothing but intelligence, audacity, and an understanding of human nature sharp as any blade, she turned seduction into statecraft and transformed her very survival into the foundation of legend. Her bedroom became a battlefield where the fate of civilizations was decided not through violence, but through the far more dangerous weapons of wit, charm, and strategic brilliance. Tonight, you've witnessed how a young woman cast into exile returned as a queen who would make Rome itself bend the knee. The last pharaoh of Egypt had learned to play the game better than anyone before or since, proving that sometimes the most powerful throne is the one you create for yourself. In the shadows of Alexandria, where whispers still topple dynasties, Cleopatra's ghost smiles, knowing she won a game that lesser players never even realized they were playing.